Namaste friends. Welcome back to the second session of Neuroscience of Learning. In this session, we are going to talk about relationship between brain and learning. In the previous session, we talked about the relevance of cognitive science and we discussed at length why we should be focusing on this discipline to solve some of the problems of learning which are related to our students and academics in general. Now this session is very focused on how brain and learning are connected, or in layman's term, what happens in the brain when we learn something. So just to get our basics clear, let's understand that we are talking about nervous system, and our nervous system is made of three broad categories. Of course, the first is our brain, which is also connected to the second part, which is called the spinal cord, and that makes the two makes central nervous system. There is a third part which is called nerves, and which is composed of various nerves across the body that help us send and receive signals to whatever happens to the respective parts of the body, and that is called peripheral nervous system. So in this session we are not going to focus on spinal cord or peripheral nervous system. Rather, we are going to talk about this brain, or we can call it brains because we have two. Now when we say brain, again we have to understand key areas of the brain that are responsible or that affect the nature and quality of our learning. So there are basically three areas. First is cerebrum, second is cerebellum, and third is brain stem. Now we need to understand function of each of these parts to gain better understanding of how we can use this insight for designing a classroom activity, or for giving certain kind of projects to students so that their brain remains more engaged and more active when they are performing those tasks. First is cerebrum. So as you can see, it is a large part of the brain, and that is connected to the outer part of the brain, and it controls. Now friends, I would like you to focus on the function of cerebrum. It controls reading, thinking, learning, speech emotions, and planned muscle movements like walking. It also controls vision, hearing, and other senses. Now cerebrum is, that's why, the pivotal part of the brain insofar as learning is concerned. If there is any damage in the cerebrum, it impairs students' capacity to learn. It could be related to hearing, could be related to seeing, could be related to even thinking. So we must protect and we must guide students that they need to take care of cerebrum. And in very soon, in the forthcoming slides, we are going to talk about how to take care of the brain as well. The second part of the brain is cerebellum. Now as you can see in this image, the little portion beneath the back side of the brain, it is here. So the back side of the brain, you can see cerebellum, and it controls balance, coordination, and fine muscle control like walking. It's very important, because in Indian classroom our students sit for very longer hours. Now sitting for longer span of time is not good for our cognitive health. So we make sure that they walk during breaks, or they change their places, and there should be movements. That's why in many educational institutes in the world, what they have started is, instead of benches and chairs, they give soft balls to students to sit on, because of that ball, students constantly move, and that movement is important for cerebellum. Third part of the brain is brain stem. So it is kind of connector between brain and spinal cord. So it is at the bottom of the brain and it connects cerebrum with the spinal cord. It controls fundamental body functions such as breathing, eye movements, blood pressure, heartbeat, and swallowing. These are also very important and very relevant for students learning, because if these functions are not happening properly, there are going to be ramifications on students' quality of learning. The coordination among these three major parts of the brain and several others help us learn better. When we learn something new, there is a physical change in the brain. Now, previously neuroscientists believed that these brain cells are fixed. We do not have new brain cells. Previously neuroscientists believed that we have finite number of brain cells and that are fixed. Now there is no addition to these brain cells. But recent studies have provided significant and reliable research data that says that no, throughout life our brain is generating new cells, and the term they are using is neuroplasticity. So whenever we learn something new, there is some physical change. So now for the first time we know that learning is not an abstract idea, it is very much physical. You can locate in the brain whether something that you just said in the classroom has been acquired by the students or not, whether students have understood the key concept you're talking or not. Now that is quite possible. And we are familiar with Kaku, one of the top-notch scientists in the world who is working in the field of neurology and cognitive science. He says, and I quote, "The human brain has 100 billion neurons, each neuron connected to 10,000 other neurons. Sitting on your shoulders is the most complicated object in the known universe." Now this is staggering simply because it tells us in a very, very strong manner that we should be focusing on our brain for doing anything and everything. Now you must be wondering how this happens. So there are neural networks. It looks like something like this. So these neural networks are like stars in the galaxy. So as you can see in this image, these cells are lightened. So even when we blink our eyes, certain cells lighten up. When I'm using my gestures to explain something, when I'm using my body language, certain cells lighten up. In the similar way, when as a student I'm learning something, certain dots, certain cells, certain neurons in my brain are connected and they prepare a kind of pattern. This pattern is called learning pathway. This pattern is called learning pathway. As you can see in this image, every time when we use or practice newly learned information or skill, the connections between the brain cells get stronger and recalling the information becomes easier. You must have tried the dotted rangoli, wherein we put certain number of dots and then we try to connect them. In the similar fashion, when we learn something, our brain connects those dots. Or in reverse engineering, the connection of the brains reveal or take the impression of what we have just learned. So the key principle here is more the connections, better is learning. Now how these connections are formed and how can we make these connections stronger. So in order to make stronger connection, we need to use something called synapses. Synapses are structures that permit a neuron to pass an electrical or chemical signal to another cell, allowing the cells to combine the networks. The synapses are very crucial parts of the brain because they are like our messengers. Now when these connections are made, we need to convert those connections into something called long-term potentiation. It's a very technical term but very useful and very easy to remember also. What is long-term potentiation? Now there's a beautiful book called New Science of Learning, wherein extensive case studies are given on how our brains learn, how these connections are made, and how to achieve long-time potentiation. At the level of neurons, establishing and then maintaining the connections is called long-time potentiation. It's like going to gym. When you go to gym and you build certain muscles, then you maintain them. Now how do you maintain them? By regular practice, by not stopping going to the gym. In the similar fashion, when we learn something, we need to practice it. Now this practice has to be of various kinds. So second thing is, as a result of long-term potential, something that was one time new to us, such as adding 2 to 5, becomes a routine. So all of us have this experience that learning, maybe driving for the first time, we are getting our hands comfortable with the steering, or our legs with the accelerator and other aspects. So that first timers anxiety is actually the creation of newer pathways. But as we gain more and more experience in our driving skills, we find that it almost becomes automatic. Sometimes we get scared when we reach home that how did we reach here? I mean we were lost in thoughts, but our muscle memory and our the peripheral nervous system remembered everything, and that's how the long-term potentiation helped us use what we learnt some time ago. The third aspect is, long-term potentiation is neurological description of how habits and long-term memories are formed. Now here we understand that when we rather rush or when we run to complete a syllabus, students don't get time to convert their newer learning into long-time potentiation. So there should be sufficient time for practice, sufficient number of activities for practicing something. I often say that variety is in our DNA. We love variety. In fact, our brain also enjoys variety. But variety in terms of what? Variety in terms of more ways of engagement. The more ways you engage with something that you are learning, such as listening, talking, reading, writing, reviewing, or thinking about the material or skill, the stronger the connections in your brain become, and the more likely the new learning will become a more permanent memory. So, as a faculty teaching any subject across the disciplines, we must ensure that we just don't lecture. In fact, these days, modern research is suggesting that lecturing is not that much a productive method of teaching as compared to other modes of learning. For instance, after, let's say, initiating the topic, or after providing key terms to the students, or after after the introduction of the session, we must engage our students into activities like brainstorming, We can make them listen to podcasts, we can make them watch videos, we can give them some hands-on activities wherein they have to prepare, let's say, a mind map, or they have to make notes. So these movements, this multi-sensory engagement during the process of learning helps learner in the stronger neural connections. Cognitive scientists say that brain is something that helps you only or as long as you use it. If you stop using it, you will lose it. So the bottom line proposition is use it or lose it. To build strong areas of knowledge, distributed practice is important. That said, even when you have learned something, if you don't practice what you have learned, the information fades. The same thing happens if you exercise for a while and then stop. The muscles fade. New learning is very much a use it or lose it proposition. You must have experienced that when we learn a new language, and most of you have tried also, when you learn a new language, you need an ambience to practice that language. And in the absence of that ambience, we simply forget. And in fact, our comfort or our ease of using that language also fades. So, after when we complete a unit, we must have certain section of time or certain segment in the lesson planning that takes care of a variety of practice, so that our students can use their brains before they lose them. Now, with that use or lose it, in the pedagogy, a new approach has entered, which is called learner-centered teaching, LCT. In this, teacher's goal is to get students to do maximum work in the learning process. Because the more work the brain does, the greater number of connections are established. More connections in turn increase the likelihood that more permanent memories will be formed. Now, there are possibilities that students who do not enjoy doing any work in the classroom, they might dislike this method. But if we provide them positive counseling, and if we share these data of how neurology works for their benefits, for their long-term potentiation, I'm sure they'll be convinced, and they will be helping you, or they will support in all classroom activities. So here now teacher's role changes from just talking to making student work or getting maximum work from them. Now comes a very interesting term in cognitive science of learning, and that is called transference of learning. Now, what is the meaning of transference? Transference means solving different problems than the ones we practice. The closer transference distance, the less you need to understand what you are doing. Real learning happens when you start to increase the distance of the transfer. Let us understand with a simple analogy. When we try to solve maths problems, our teachers used to give us certain problems for practice. When the digits are not similar or in similar proportion to what we practice, we used to find it very difficult. But some students can even solve the problems that were not distantly connected with the problems that they practice in the classroom. So here it is the practice session, and the transfer is the variety of the problems that are given to the students. This distance is an acid test. If our students can practice whatever they have learned after crossing this distance in a newer life situations, we can be assured that yes, whatever we taught them, they got it. So this learning transfer has to happen. Now there's a strong connection. As I said, we would also discuss how brain is helped by some of the habits we should be forming, or some of the habits we should tell our students to form. So the first of the category is brain, diet and learning. The human brain uses 25 to 30% of body's energy in the form of glucose every day. What it means is, if we do not have sufficient glucose in the body, our brain won't be able to use at least 25 to 30% of that glucose for being active and engaged in the learning tasks. Second is, to do this, we need to avoid simple carbohydrates containing sugar or white flour. For example, pastries, white bread and pasta. These are exactly the same things that our students enjoy, isn't it? They enjoy these, in fact they love these items, but they are unaware that these items are actually hampering their learning, and we should make them aware of these facts and figures that this is not good for your cognitive health. The third thing is, we should rely on complex carbohydrates found in fruits, whole grains and vegetables. So again we are talking about natural diet. Again we are talking about going back to the basics, not only for our physical health but also for our cognitive health. Along with diet comes water. And water is perhaps the most significant part in the body, right, that controls so many other things including our brain. Water is needed for the brain's production of hormones and neurotransmitters. So these neurotransmitters are like boosted by synapses that we just talked about. These are the key players in the brain's communication system, which is at the heart of learning. According to Norman, dehydration can lead to fatigue, dizziness, poor concentration and reduced cognitive abilities. Even mild levels of dehydration can impact school performance or learning performance. So friends, what it says is, our students must be consuming sufficient water. Now it's very difficult to see these two connections, like connection between consuming or taking sufficient water and our neural activities, but these have been proven facts in the field of neurology. Sometimes our students avoid water, sometimes certain schools, colleges, universities, reference students use water bottles, or they don't, some teachers don't permit them go out and take water, but all these have impacts on their learning. Another interesting part about water is, when we wake up each morning, we are likely dehydrated. Just think about it. We have not had any liquid intake for 6 to 10 hours, because 6 to 10 hours is like the average sleep that we get. And the body loses a significant amount of water while it sleeps. What it means is that our brain is not ready to learn anything in the absence of water. So we need to prepare our brain, right? Like we prepare everything, like before going to office, we prepare ourselves well in terms of our dress, in terms of our laptops, our chargers, our books, our files. When we go for attending a social function, we prepare ourselves accordingly. But do we prepare ourselves before going for learning anything? Shouldn't we guide our students in these areas of cognitive science, that friends, before you come to college or university, you need to prepare your brain. And how do you prepare your brain? Couple of things we just discussed. You should have proper diet, you should have sufficient water, so that your brains remain more engaged and more active. because there is no other way of controlling our brain to remain focused than sum total of all these things that we are discussing. After diet, there's an interesting concept that all of us would agree, and that is brain, sleep and learning. There is a strong connection between the quality of sleep and quality of learning. In fact, they are proportional to each other. The quality of sleep decides the quality of learning. In addition to providing opportunity to consolidate learning material, sleep allows your brain to clear space for new learning to occur the next day. In fact, it is a beautiful function of the brain to cleanse unnecessary stuff that we are storing. So every day our brain refreshes certain section of the brain, and we're going to talk about that section soon, in order to store newer memories, newer learning. So that cleansing has to happen. Like bodily cleansing, cognitive cleansing is a must. Sleep helps in shifting memories from brain's hippocampus, which has limited storage space, to nearly limitless or infinite prefrontal cortex hard drive, thus freeing up the hippocampus to take in the fresh data or new learning. That's why we must ensure that students sleep, particularly the kind of age we are dealing with. These are the students who are like night owls. They put up very late and they wake up like till early morning and then they sleep, and that not only disturbs their digestive system but also cognitive aspects. So we must guide our students to have proper sleep so that their hippocampus is clean. Now this is the hippocampus we are talking about. These two lightened up pieces are called hippocampus, and it has a very limited storage capacity. That's why we need quality of sleep. When we talk about storage capacity, we are talking about memory. So there are three stages of memory: encoding, storage and retrieval. It is difficult to encode new learning when we are tired or unable to pay attention to the information. What it means is, if our students are not, and in fact we also, if we are not getting proper sleep, if we are sleep deprived, our brain will not cooperate in learning anything new. In fact, even if you learn, the quality will always be of poor nature. Second is, when we are sleep deprived, it becomes more difficult to learn new information the longer we awake. Similarly, without proper sleep, there is no proper storage of information, and that makes it difficult even in the retrieval. Even when we want that information back for using for any of the purposes, we won't be able to retrieve it. That's why sleep is key areas. In fact, one of the findings of happiness suggests that among the top 5 reasons that make people happier, sleep is at number 1. People who are sleep deprived cannot experience the real state of happiness or blissfulness. In the similar line of thought, a daily 20 to 30 minute nap is great for improving learning and memory. And that is why in Finland, breaks between or recess between 2 lectures is longer enough so that students can take naps, they can play around, they can absorb what has been learned. This is something that is missing in our information heavy lectures universities. We have back to back 6 lectures, with hardly a lunch break and maybe a 10 minutes of, freshen up breaks. But we need more breaks. In fact, we should provide times for quick naps. Constant sensory stimulation of your brain, for example, listening to music hour after hour or constantly texting, can exhaust the brain and make learning difficult. Now, this is the pandemic that the youth is suffering. That before they go to sleep, they are using these gadgets, smartphones, tablets, laptops, and they are constantly texting and active, neurologically active in performing those tasks. Now, what happens in the brain is the brain gets a bad habit. The brain feels that okay, this is not the time to sleep, this is the time to work. Now that creates a lot of problems. So then sleep deprivation take place and we cannot sleep properly. So we must be guiding our students in terms of dropping the use of cell phone at least 1 hour before they sleep, and putting it at least 10 feet away would be the best practice insofar as improving the learning quality is concerned. After diet and sleep comes exercise. There is strongest connection between our learning and exercise. Getting adequate exercise, especially aerobic exercise, is the single most important thing a person can do to improve their learning. Our brains were shaped and sharpened by movement. That's why I had said that sitting constantly is dangerous for learning. In fact, there are people in this world who have to move to think. I repeat, they have to move to think. When they sit constantly at a place, they cannot think, or they cannot think beyond their limits. In fact, there is one more interesting finding in the cognitive science, and that is after doing a physical activity, a learner cannot choose not to learn. I repeat, after doing a physical activity, a learner cannot choose not to learn. Now, this is an insight we can directly use in the classroom. That when you enter the classroom, you can start with some kind of physical ice-breaking activity. Maybe clapping, maybe rolling of the hands, maybe twisting the body here and there, maybe changing their places. This could be good. You must be thinking that okay, these are school type activities. No, they are not just school type activities. Corporate companies and corporate trainers are using these activities extensively with adult learners, and they are gaining good results. So why not start with university students or college students? They will have greater benefits. Being in motion by walking, for example, when thinking about how to solve a problem, developing ideas for a paper, brainstorming a great speech, or performing many other learning tasks is an optimal way to learn. So what we can do is sometimes we can have lectures, smaller lecture, let's say 10 minutes walk sessions with a group of students. You can just walk with them and discuss. Sometimes it would be great to make them sit in circle when they can share, they can exchange ideas and brainstorm. But above all of this, we need to tell them that exercise must be a routine. So far in India, we do not have a culture of exercise as part of the routine. Like we take bath or brush our teeth, exercise must be an inevitable part of our day-to-day routine. Recently, I met an Indian teacher who teaches in China, and he shared a very interesting thing. He said that you won't find a single Chinese who is not jogging, who is not running. Now, that was really powerful statement. That do we have students who are jogging? Do all our students jog? That's the question, because that is related to their brain and learning directly. There's a beautiful book I am recommending to all of you to read, and the name of the book is Spark: The Revolutionary New Science of Exercise and the Brain. And it is by John Ratey. And I'm quoting from that book. When humans exercise, specific neurochemicals and proteins, messengers of the brain, are released in greater amounts. These chemicals and proteins improve human ability to take in, process, and remember new information and skills. Now, these messengers are very significant. In fact, if we study evolutionary biology, if we look at how we evolved from apes to humans, a very critical thing happened when we stood up on our two. When we stood up on our feet, our front feet became our hands. Now, why this was a critical moment in evolution? Now, this is very well documented in the works of J. Bronowski. He said that when our front feet became hands, the surplus feet, we started doing things like, hanging to trees, or maybe, cutting a twig, breaking a twig, or maybe lighting a fire, like whatever. These hand movements actually triggered certain brain cells, and that's where we started using this CPU, this supercomputer. In fact, that was the beginning of the first use of our brain for simplifying so many life tasks. So that's why exercise is very important to keep this brain alive. But unfortunately, sedentary is more frequent than walking. Students sit longer hours, not only in lectures but in canteens, on benches, just using their cell phones. Now that has to change, and we should do it collectively. This is an interesting finding. In fact, the revolutionary finding, I would say, is that of BDNF. It is called brain derived neurotrophic factor. It was found in the year 1995 by a scientist called Cotman. So what is this BDNF? BDNF serves as fertilizer for brain cells, keeping them functioning and growing, as well as spurring the growth of new neurons. Now, what is the connection between this fertilizer BDNF and exercise? Exercise prepares and encourages nerve cells to bind to one another, and this binding is the cellular basis for learning new information. In a simpler words, these exercises help us in the form of glue, adhesive. It binds our cells stay together, and when they remain together, the possibilities of a newer and stronger connection is higher. Aerobic exercise 30 minutes a day, 4 to 5 days a week is the gold standard for improving learning. So this is how we can protect our brain, remain young, alive and active for learning anything throughout our life. So friends, this is how our brain is connected to learning, and if we use various things that we discussed, for example, long-term potentiation by making the neural connection stronger. How do we make neural connections stronger? By presenting variety of activities, not just lecturing. We should focus on learning transference. Learning transference is giving newer situations wherein students can use whatever they learned in the classroom or learned as part of the syllabus. We talked about synapses that use as the messenger that send the chemical and electrical signal to communicate the learning pathways. We also talked about diet, water, sleep, exercise, and how all of this are making our brain learning ready. So the question is, can we use these insights in our classroom while delivering our syllabi, while delivering our sessions? Only then we can leverage the best of this cognitive science into pedagogy. We will meet in the next session on how to be a neuro-enlightened learner teacher. Thank you so much.